So here's the deal. My mother-in-law actually hired some phony lawyer in a wild attempt to take over a house I inherited. But I wasn't just going to sit back and let it happen. I had a game plan that flipped the whole situation on its head, and what followed had everyone completely stunned. I'm a 38-year-old guy, and I've been practicing law for just over 12 years now. I don't usually go around advertising that fact, though. Most of the time, it works better if people underestimate you. Plus, the second you mention you're a lawyer, folks either start asking for free legal advice or get all awkward. So I tend to keep it under wraps unless it's absolutely necessary. My wife, Rachel, and I have been married for 8 years, and honestly, our relationship is solid. We make a pretty strong team, which really comes in handy, especially when dealing with certain high-maintenance relatives like her mom, Linda. Now, Linda, she's a force of nature. The kind of person who believes she's the smartest one in the room, needs to have a hand in every little decision, and simply cannot admit she might be wrong. Ever. From the very beginning, it was clear she wasn't thrilled about me. Rachel's family is very close-knit, but Linda has always been the one pulling the strings. She micromanaged everything from where the family vacation to assigning Thanksgiving duties like she was running a board meeting. She always had something to say about everything, and she never hesitated to let you know what she thought. Once I entered Rachel's life, I don't think Linda ever saw me as part of the family. More like someone who disrupted her carefully curated world. I probably didn't match the picture-perfect son-in-law she had in mind, some well-groomed doctor or a high-earning corporate executive. I come from a middle-class background. I worked my tail off to get through law school, and these days, I'm doing pretty well. But none of that mattered to Linda. In her eyes, I was just the guy who took her daughter away from her inner circle. At first, I tried to be polite. She's my wife's mom, and Rachel cares deeply about her. So I figured I'd smile, keep my head down, and maintain the peace. But Linda made that more and more difficult. She had this subtle but sharp way of slipping in passive-aggressive jabs disguised as small talk. During family dinners, she'd casually say things like, "Oh, you're a lawyer? My cousin's kid is at Harvard Law." Or, "It's sweet that you work so hard." Rachel's ex didn't have to. His family actually had money. To Rachel's credit, she always stood up for me and never let those comments slide. But Linda would immediately switch to victim mode, claiming she was just making conversation or that we'd misunderstood her. Classic Linda. Things really began escalating after my uncle passed away about 3 years ago. He left me a small beach cottage in his will. Nothing fancy, just a cozy little 2-bedroom that had been in our family for generations. The place definitely needed work, peeling paint, a sketchy roof, and plumbing that probably hadn't been touched since the 70s. But it had charm and history. Rachel and I fell in love with it right away and decided to fix it up as our weekend escape. That's when Linda's behavior shifted. At first, it was little comments like, "A beach property? That's a big responsibility at your age," or "Are you sure you'll manage the expenses?" Slightly irritating, but still within the bounds of typical mother-in-law concern. Then she started stopping by unannounced, claiming she was just in the neighborhood. Never mind that we live almost 90 miles from her, and the beach house is even farther. Her excuses didn't hold water. One day, our neighbor Walter, an older retired guy who looks out for the neighborhood, gave me a call. He said he saw a woman with tornado-proof hair snooping around the property while we were away. That description could only mean one person, Linda. When I confronted her, she brushed it off like it was no big deal. "I was just making sure everything was okay," she said, as if randomly trespassing was perfectly normal. But that was just the beginning. I started noticing odd things inside the house. A chair moved slightly. A window I knew I'd locked left cracked open. Small items just out of place enough to make me question my memory. Rachel thought I was imagining things, but I knew something wasn't right. And then one day, I came back from running errands and found a folder sitting on the kitchen table. Inside were property documents, real legal paperwork. At first, I thought it had to be some strange joke. But then I saw the handwritten notes in the margins, phrases like family legacy and secure ownership in Linda's unmistakable handwriting. Suddenly, it all clicked. Linda wasn't just poking around. She was planning something. Something that didn't include Rachel and me. Instead of confronting her right away, I decided to play it smart. I've learned in my profession that having all your evidence in order makes for a stronger case. So I started gathering proof. I installed a few discrete cameras in the common areas of the house. Not to spy, just to find out what was really going on. Within a week, I had footage of Linda unlocking the front door with a key, one she wasn't supposed to have. Clearly, she'd made a copy behind our backs. When I showed the video to Rachel, she was livid. She confronted her mom immediately. Linda, of course, denied everything. But when the footage left no room for denial, she shifted tactics and claimed she was just trying to help. Rachel laid down the law and told her mom to stay away from the property. And for a while, it seemed like she did. Things went quiet. But of course, Linda wasn't done. I should have known she was just waiting for her next move. About 9 months later, she came back in full force. One bright Saturday morning, she showed up at the beach house, this time with some man by her side. She introduced him, loud and proud, as my lawyer. I was inside, halfway through a bagel and enjoying the peace, when Rachel called me out to the porch. And there they were, Linda and her so-called legal backup, standing there like they owned the place. There stood Linda, squeezed into her usual way too tight blazer, hair teased to the heavens. Beside her was a man who looked like he'd learned business casual from a last-minute Pinterest board. He clutched a battered briefcase that seemed to have survived the Cold War, and he had the nervous energy of someone who wasn't entirely sure why he'd even shown up. "Good morning," Linda chirped, all chipper like she hadn't just strolled onto private property uninvited. "We need to go over some urgent family matters," she said, trying for serious. I raised an eyebrow. "Oh yeah? That's so?" "Absolutely," she replied, brushing past me like the deed had her name on it. "It's about the long-term plans for this house," she announced, striding inside. "And you're welcome, by the way, for me taking the time to come down here and help you sort things out. I'll admit, I was curious." Linda could be pushy, sure, but this was next-level bold. So I let her talk. The more rope she had, the faster she'd hang herself. Rachel stood there stunned, looking at her mom like she'd just announced a presidential campaign. Linda plopped down at the kitchen table with a dramatic flourish and opened a manila folder like she was revealing classified intel. "Glenn, let's begin," she barked, gesturing to the guy in the rumpled suit. Glenn, who looked ready to vanish into thin air, fumbled open his briefcase and started pulling out documents like a shaky street magician dealing cards. I glanced at Rachel, who silently mouthed, "What the hell?" I just shrugged. This was Linda's circus, and I wasn't about to interrupt the clown act. Linda tapped the top page with a perfectly manicured nail. "This is a transfer of ownership agreement. It's simple." She looked at us expectantly, like applause was in order. "You and Rachel are going to sign the house over to me," she said, beaming, "and I'll make sure it stays in the family for generations." I stared at her, biting the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. "You want us to sign over the house to you?" "Yes," she said, with the ease of someone suggesting we try oat milk. "It's the right thing to do. You two are young, not exactly experienced in property management. This requires someone with real understanding." I raised a brow, working hard to keep a straight face. "And you're that someone?" "Exactly," she replied, glowing with self-importance. "This isn't personal, sweetheart. It's about doing what's best for the family." Meanwhile, Glenn was still fumbling through the paperwork like he was about to pull a rabbit from his sleeve. Eventually, he slid one of the documents across the table. "If you could just review this." I picked it up, skimmed the first page, and nearly laughed out loud. It was a disaster. Sloppy language, critical sections missing or incomplete, typos all over the place. Everything about Glenn screamed not legit, from his shaky hands to the way he avoided eye contact like it was contagious. So I decided to have a little fun. I tossed out a few basic legal questions, nothing too advanced, just stuff any first-year law student should be able to answer without breaking a sweat. Glenn floundered, stammering through half-answers, while Linda kept jumping in to steer the conversation. "Linda," I said, laying the document on the table, "did you write this yourself?" She flushed. "Absolutely not. Glenn is a trained professional." "Right," I said, turning to Glenn. "So, Glenn, which law school did you graduate from?" He blinked. "Oh, I didn't exactly finish." I cut in, smoothly. "No problem. What's your bar number?" Glenn began sweating like we were under interrogation lights. I haven't officially been licensed yet." "Not officially licensed," I echoed, feigning confusion. "So, you're not a lawyer?" He mumbled something vague about being in the process, but I waved it off. "Thanks, Glenn. That clears it up." Linda jumped in, clearly annoyed that her plan was unraveling. "Let's not get caught up in technicalities. What matters is that we move forward with the paperwork." Rachel wasn't having it. "Are you actually serious right now?" she snapped. "You brought a fake lawyer to our home and expect us to just hand over the house." "He's not fake," Linda barked. "Glenn is more than capable." "Sure," I said, leaning back in my chair with a grin. Let's see just how capable he really is. I turned to Glenn. Can you explain the difference between a quitclaim deed and a warranty deed? Glenn froze like someone had pressed pause. Linda opened her mouth, but I held up a hand. No. Let's give Glenn a chance. He stammered something about legal terms and documents, but never actually gave a real answer. I nodded, pretending to be impressed. Great. Now, tell me, what happens when someone signs a deed transfer without title insurance? Glenn's face drained of color. He looked like he might faint. Linda, on the other hand, was practically vibrating with frustration. This is absurd, she snapped. Just sign the papers, and we'll sort out the details later. I stood up, walked calmly to my briefcase, and retrieved a folder. I laid it on the table with a firm thunk. As a practicing attorney, I said, opening it, I have a few concerns about your paperwork. Linda's jaw dropped. You're a lawyer? Yep, I replied, popping the P. And these documents? I held one up like courtroom evidence. They're trash. Then I went through each page, one by one, pointing out every legal flaw, down to the last comma, explaining why the entire thing wasn't just invalid, but borderline fraudulent. By the end, Glenn looked like he wanted to dissolve into the floor. Linda glared at me like she was trying to set me on fire with her mind. You've made your point, she hissed through gritted teeth. Oh, we're not finished just yet, I said, flipping open my laptop. You've been snooping around the property records, haven't you? Thought I wouldn't catch the unauthorized lookups. Linda's face drained of color. I have no idea what you're talking about. Right? I said, pulling up an email on the screen. This here's from the county clerk's office. It lists multiple title history inquiries, all tied to your email address. Care to explain that, Linda? She jumped up so quickly her chair toppled over. I was just trying to protect the family, she snapped, as if yelling made her actions noble. By stealing our home. Rachel shot back, her voice cracking with disbelief. This is absolutely nuts, Mom. You need to leave. Now. Linda glared at us with pure venom before whipping around to Glenn. We're leaving, she barked. Glenn didn't hesitate. He clutched his dusty briefcase like it held the last scraps of his dignity and bolted for the door. Linda stormed after him, but not without delivering one final parting shot. You're going to regret this. When the door slammed behind them, silence fell like a heavy curtain. Rachel and I just stood there, stunned, trying to absorb what had just unfolded. Well, Rachel finally said, that was something. Something I'll be mentally filing under Exhibits A through Z, I replied. And that's how Linda's master plan, Operation Steal the Beach House, crashed and burned in truly spectacular fashion. What I didn't realize back then was that this fiasco was only Act 1 of what would soon become the Linda Show. After her scheme went up in smoke, she didn't retreat. No, she went into full crisis mode spin. She picked up the phone and started calling every relative in her contact list like she was campaigning for public office. In Linda's rewritten version of events, I was the evil puppet master manipulating poor, innocent Rachel and tearing her away from her loving, devoted mother. She cast me as some mustache-twirling villain plotting to destroy everything she held dear. Now, Rachel's family is pretty tight-knit, but they're also not idiots. Most of them know Linda lives for drama the way most people live for air, and that she treats the truth like a gymnast, always twisting it into bizarre contortions. Still, a few relatives reached out, asking what was really going on. Once I laid everything out, fake lawyer, forged documents, unauthorized access, and surprise break-ins, most of them either laughed or sighed. Yeah, that sounds like Linda. Apparently, this wasn't her first rodeo. But even for her, trying to steal a house was a bold new low. One cousin even called it creative truth-telling, which might be the most diplomatic way I've ever heard someone say pathological lying. But not everyone was ready to let it go. Some of Linda's die-hard supporters, like her sister Marcia, who's basically Linda with a megaphone, weren't buying our side of the story. Marcia ended up calling Rachel, and let me tell you, eavesdropping on that conversation was pure theater. Rachel, I just don't understand why you're letting your husband come between you and your mother, Marcia said, in that sanctimonious tone that seems genetically inherited in their family. My husband's not the issue, Marcia, Rachel said flatly. Mom tried to steal our house. Well, that's not what she told me, Marcia huffed, like she was unraveling some grand conspiracy. Of course not, Rachel snapped. Because if she told you what really happened, you'd see how completely insane this all is. Marcia tried to dig in her heels, but Rachel wasn't playing. Believe whatever you want, she said. But I was there. I saw it. That's the end of it. And with that, she hung up the phone, seething. I don't even know why I bother with her, she muttered. But Linda wasn't just stirring up drama on the phone. Oh no. She was fine-tuning her performance for every family gathering, milking her role as the wounded matriarch with full-on Oscar ambition. She'd show up dressed in muted tones, sigh dramatically, and drop lines like, I don't even know if I'll ever see my daughter again. Or, some people just don't value family anymore. It was passive aggression at its theatrical finest. Almost impressive, really, just how far she took the act. Then things got even weirder when the chaos started bleeding into her professional life. Turns out, Linda had been using her company's systems to dig up information about our beach house. I guess she figured no one would notice. Spoiler alert, someone did. One day, Rachel got a call from her cousin, who just happened to work in HR at Linda's company. Crazy coincidence, the cousin said. Did you hear what happened with Linda? What now? Rachel asked. She got fired. Apparently, she'd been using her work email to snoop through property databases and send off some sketchy messages, none of which had anything to do with her actual job. Rachel switched to speakerphone so I could hear, and we just stared at each other in disbelief. She got herself canned over us, I said, shaking my head. Word traveled fast, and suddenly even the relatives who'd been on the fence started circling back, offering apologies for ever doubting us. I can't believe she went that far, one cousin said. We always knew she was a lot, but this is next level. Yeah, I told them. Welcome to the front lines. With her job gone and some of her most loyal defenders backing away, Linda's social calendar got very quiet, very fast. But if you think that slowed her down, Al, friend, you really don't know Linda. About a week after Linda got canned, we started receiving strange messages from people we barely knew, acquaintances, distant relatives, folks lingering at the edge of our social circle. Things like, Linda says she's really worried about you too, or she mentioned you might be having money troubles. Do you need anything? It didn't take a rocket scientist to figure out what she was doing. She was seeding the narrative that Rachel and I couldn't handle the beach house. I guess in her fantasy, enough people would believe it, and she'd swoop in like some benevolent savior with a martyr complex. I considered confronting her, but Rachel talked me down. She's digging her own grave, she said. The more she talks, the worse she looks. And she was right. The more Linda ran her mouth, the faster her mask cracked. Even her most loyal cheerleaders, like Marcia, started losing patience with the ongoing drama. But just when it seemed like things might finally be dying down, Linda came back swinging with her most outrageous move yet. About a month later, we received a letter in the mail. Official envelope. Real law firm. Actual licensed attorney. Linda was suing us. When I opened it and read through the contents, I had to double-check to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. She claimed she had contributed financially to the repairs and maintenance of the beach house, and that those phantom contributions entitled her to legal ownership. Never mind that the house had been willed to Rachel and me. No strings attached. Right there in black and white. I blinked a few times in disbelief, then burst out laughing. She's suing us? I said, waving the papers. For what? Rachel asked, grabbing the envelope. Apparently, she thinks the imaginary money she never gave us somehow bought her a slice of real estate. Just like that, we were knee-deep in Linda's nonsense again. As soon as we got the notice, I sprang into action. I compiled every shred of evidence. Bank statements, contractor invoices, estate documents, email threads, everything. I wasn't about to let her throw smoke bombs and pray we couldn't see through the haze. Rachel, understandably, was furious. She didn't pay for anything. How does she think she's going to prove this? She's gambling on us being disorganized, I said. But we're not. And that's going to blow her whole case apart. So what now? Rachel asked. We let her perform. And then we dismantle it, one fact at a time. When our court date arrived, we walked into the courtroom fully prepared. Linda was already seated at the plaintiff's table with her new attorney. This one at least looked licensed, though he wore the uneasy expression of a man who knew he'd backed the wrong horse. Linda, meanwhile, was thriving. She wore one of her trademark, overly dramatic outfits, something that screamed retail therapy and delusion, and had a smug grin like the verdict had already been written in her favor. We took our seats. The judge, a stern older woman with sharp eyes and a clipped tone, entered and got straight to business. She asked Linda's attorney to present the case. He stood and launched into a well-rehearsed monologue. He painted Linda as a devoted mother, selflessly committed to preserving her family's legacy. Then came the kicker. He claimed Linda had spent significant personal funds to maintain and repair the beach house, doing so out of love and duty. She brought receipts? I whispered to Rachel. No, she whispered back. She brought audacity. Her lawyer continued, arguing that although the property had been inherited, Linda's alleged contributions granted her legal interest in it. She acted in good faith, he said, to maintain a shared family asset. Then it was my turn. I stood, calm and direct. Your Honor, none of this holds water. The home was left to my wife and me, explicitly and legally in my uncle's will. There was no verbal, written, or implied agreement granting the plaintiff any stake in the property. She has no documentation to support these claims, because they never happened. The judge nodded and asked Linda to take the stand. She rose slowly, composed, hands neatly folded, like she was walking into a scene she'd been rehearsing in her head for months. Mrs. Linda, her lawyer said, can you tell us about your involvement with maintaining the beach house? Of course, she said sweetly. When I heard the house was left to my daughter and son-in-law, I was thrilled. But it needed a lot of work. They seemed overwhelmed, so I offered to help. And how exactly did you help? I paid for some of the repairs, she said, chin lifted. Plumbing, roof patching, a bit of landscaping. I didn't track every dollar because it's family. I just wanted to help make it livable. I kept my expression neutral, but inside I was shaking my head. The confidence with which she lied was, frankly, impressive. Her attorney leaned in. So you did contribute financially to the home's upkeep? Yes, Linda nodded with conviction. I even helped supervise some of the work myself. Did the defendants ever acknowledge your contributions? It was understood, she said, with that vague, breezy tone she used whenever she was skating on thin ice. Then came my turn to cross-examine. I approached the stand slowly, holding a thick folder stuffed with documents. Mrs. Linda, I began, you testified that you financially contributed to repairs at the beach house. Could you tell us the exact amounts and the dates those payments were made? She paused, just long enough. Well, I didn't exactly keep receipts, Linda said, fidgeting in her seat. But it was definitely a few $1,000s over several months. Thousands, huh? I repeated, eyeing her. And how exactly did you pay? Checks? Cash? Direct to contractors? Mostly cash, she mumbled, visibly uncomfortable. Cash, I echoed, letting the word hang in the air like a bad smell. So no receipts, no invoices, no bank records, nothing at all to support these supposed contributions? She hesitated. It was informal. I mean, it's family. We don't always track every little thing. Interesting, I said, turning toward the judge. Because I have here a complete record of every single payment made for that property's repairs and upkeep. All transactions were made through a joint account shared by my wife and me. We've got contractor invoices, email correspondence, and matching bank statements. I handed over the folder. The judge began reviewing the contents carefully, flipping through the pages without expression. Mrs. Linda, I continued, you also claimed you helped oversee the work being done. Can you name any of the contractors involved? She paused, searching for anything. It wasn't exactly a formal setup, she said at last. Convenient, I replied, holding up a second set of documents. Because these emails from all the repair teams show that every communication went through either me or my wife. Your name doesn't appear once. The judge looked up from the evidence with a blank expression that carried the weight of a verdict. Mrs. Linda, she said, calm but firm, your entire claim hinges on the assertion that you contributed financially to this property. So far, you've provided no documentation to support that. Meanwhile, the defendants have submitted extensive records to the contrary. Do you have anything else to present? Linda looked like the floor had been pulled out from under her. For the first time in this whole circus, the gravity of her actions seemed to sink in. I didn't think I'd need proof, she whispered. It wasn't supposed to come to this. I returned to our table and pulled out the final nail. Your Honor, I said, I'd like to submit a copy of my uncle's will. It explicitly states the house was left solely to my wife and me. There is no mention of shared ownership or financial obligation to any other party. The judge reviewed the will, gave it a brief nod, and looked back at Linda. Mrs. Linda, she said, with pointed restraint, I strongly advise you to think very carefully before pursuing future legal action without substantial evidence. This court does not entertain baseless claims or personal vendettas. And just like that, she dismissed the case. We won. As we walked out of the courtroom, I felt that rare, clean kind of satisfaction that only comes when truth slices through layers of nonsense. Linda had done everything she could to discredit us, but in the end, facts crushed fiction. Still, I wasn't naive enough to think it was over. With Linda, drama doesn't end, it just shifts. Sure enough, instead of taking the loss and reflecting on the chaos she'd caused, Linda did what Linda does best. She spun the entire courtroom defeat into a sob story. She cast herself as the tragic victim of an uncaring system that sided with her cold, ungrateful daughter and the manipulative man who tore their family apart. The fallout came fast. Word of the failed lawsuit spread through the family like wildfire. Our phones lit up with texts and calls. Most people just wanted the tea. A few were genuinely stunned she'd gone that far. But the best call came from Rachel's cousin Brenda, the family's reigning queen of blunt honesty. She really thought she could win? Brenda laughed. I mean, I knew Aunt Linda was a handful, but this is next level. Then she added, honestly, why would anyone believe her? She's been pulling stunts like this for years. And that became the vibe across the board. One by one, family members began swapping stories, Linda's greatest hits. It was like her loss in court had snapped everyone out of a long collective trance. One cousin shared how Linda once tried to convince her own sister to give her financial control, claiming she was too overwhelmed to manage money. Another remembered when Linda charmed someone into handing over a family heirloom for safekeeping, only for it to mysteriously disappear. For the first time, people weren't just reacting to what Linda had done to us, they were reflecting on what she'd done to them. It was the beginning of a reckoning. Rachel and I tried to stay above the family gossip storm, but honestly, it was hard not to feel a little vindicated. Linda had spent years building herself up as the respected matriarch, the glue that held everything together. And now, that carefully polished image was falling apart. The best part? We didn't have to lift a finger. She did it all on her own. But even as the rest of the family began pulling away from her, Linda couldn't let go of the grudge. She started sending Rachel these long, drawn-out texts packed with guilt trips and emotional landmines. According to Linda, Rachel had betrayed her. She's acting like we dragged her into court, Rachel said, rolling her eyes as she scrolled through yet another novella-length message. Classic Linda, I said. She's not sorry for what she did. She's just sorry it didn't work. Eventually, Rachel blocked her number. She needed a break from the constant drama. But, of course, that only poured gasoline on the fire. Linda took her show to Facebook, posting cryptic, melodramatic statuses about being abandoned by those closest to you. I give it 2 days before she's crying on Facebook Live, I joked. Surrounded by ceramic angels and a forest of scented candles. We laughed at first, but things escalated. Fast. Linda started reaching out to anyone who would listen, casting herself as the heartbroken mother who only wanted to hold her family together and got stabbed in the back for trying. Naturally, one of her first calls went to her sister Marcia, Linda's most loyal supporter. But even Marcia had apparently hit her limit. She called me crying, Marcia told Rachel during a phone call one night. But honestly, I didn't know what to say. You're my niece. And what she did, it was wrong. I can't defend her this time. Coming from Marcia, that meant something. If even she was done, then Linda's whole foundation was crumbling. But Linda wasn't ready to quit. Her next move? Go straight to the top. She drove, unannounced, as always, to visit Rachel's grandmother. The one person in the family who had always stayed neutral. She spent 2 full hours crying, retelling her version of events, and begging for sympathy. But Grandma wasn't buying it. According to what Rachel's cousin Brenda heard later, Grandma had laid it out, plain and simple. She told Linda, I love you, but you need to take responsibility for the mess you've made. Stop stirring up drama. She actually said that? Rachel asked when Brenda told her. Word for word, Brenda confirmed. This is your doing. Now clean it up. Linda left in a huff, of course. But at that point, the damage was done. She'd burned nearly every bridge in the family. And no amount of crying or cryptic posts could rebuild what she'd torn down. Meanwhile, Rachel and I finally felt like we could breathe again. The house was officially ours. The legal mess was behind us. And, for a time, Linda went quiet. For a time. But I knew better. Linda was like a storm. You never knew exactly when she'd hit, but the clouds always came back. Rachel and I talked a lot about what came next. I was ready to go full no contact. After everything, I couldn't see any path back to a normal relationship. But Rachel wasn't there yet. She's still my mom, she said one night, as we sat on the porch, watching the waves. I know she's toxic. I know what she did was awful. but part of me still hopes she'll change. I didn't want to push her, but I also couldn't ignore what Linda had done. I get it, I said carefully. But you've seen what she's capable of. This wasn't a misunderstanding, this was calculated. She tried to hurt us. I know, Rachel said with a sigh. I'm just not ready to walk away completely. So we compromised. Rachel kept a minimum level of contact. A birthday text here. A 5-minute phone call there. But we agreed on firm, unshakable boundaries. No surprise visits. No discussion about the house. And zero tolerance for manipulation. And for a little while, it actually worked. Linda kept things surface level. She reached out only occasionally. Kept her tone light. I knew it wasn't easy for Rachel. But she held the line, and I respected the hell out of her for it. Of course, it didn't last. Because Linda is Linda. And Linda always crosses the line. It started small. Rachel got a call from a cousin who'd overheard Linda talking about the beach house again. She said something about how it should have stayed in the family, the cousin said. Didn't sound like a big deal, but I figured you should know. Rachel tried to shrug it off. Just Linda venting, right? But I saw the unease in her eyes. What if she's planning something, she asked me. She wouldn't, I said. Not after the lawsuit. She knows she can't win. Turns out, I underestimated her. One weekend, Rachel and I decided to take a quiet trip out to the beach house. Just a little recharge time. But the second we pulled into the driveway, I felt it. Something was off. The front door was ajar. Not wide open, but not closed either. And sitting right on the porch was a cardboard box. What the hell? Rachel muttered, climbing out of the car. We approached cautiously. I pushed the door open, and my stomach dropped. The living room was a wreck. The furniture had been moved around. Drawers were left wide open. And sitting dead center on the coffee table was a thick stack of papers. Right on top, a handwritten note. There was no mistaking that bold, dramatic handwriting. It was Linda. The note read, I'm sorry, but I had to step in. This house matters too much to let you destroy it. One day, you'll see I was right. Rachel stood frozen, her eyes locked on the paper. Her voice barely a whisper. She was here. I picked up the stack and began flipping through it. Contractor estimates. Appliance upgrades. Flooring replacements. Landscaping plans. She decided on her own to renovate the house. No permission. No notice. She broke in, I said, my voice tight with fury. She walked into our home like it was hers, and just took over. Rachel sank slowly onto the edge of the couch, her face pale. I can't believe this, she whispered. I pulled out my phone and opened the security camera app. There she was, Linda, waltzing in with a clipboard and tape measure like she was hosting her own home makeover show. She'd spend hours in the house, room by room, digging through drawers, taking notes, measuring walls. Rachel watched the footage silently. But with each passing second, her expression changed, shock hardening into steel. By the time it ended, her voice was ice. She didn't just cross a line, she said flatly. She bulldozed it. I nodded. This is who she is, Rachel. She's never going to stop. She'll always think she has the right to control you. Rachel didn't speak right away. But then she looked at me, jaw set. I steady. You know what, she said. I'm done. I can't do this anymore. That night, she called Linda. The confrontation was short, firm, unapologetic. I can't believe you would do this, Rachel said into the phone. You broke into our house. You went through our things. How could you possibly think that was okay? Linda, as always, went straight to the victim card. I was only trying to help, she said, tears already creeping into her voice. You've been shutting me out, and I thought this would show you how much I care. Rachel stayed calm, unshaken. This isn't love, she said. It's control. And I'm done letting you manipulate me. Linda cried harder, but Rachel didn't flinch. I don't want to hear from you anymore. Not unless you've actually changed. And I mean truly changed. I'm blocking your number. I don't want you near us, or the house again. Linda tried to protest, but Rachel had already made her choice. She hung up. Then she blocked her. Phone, email, every social platform. It wasn't a decision she made lightly, but it was necessary. Linda had crossed every line, burned every bridge, and at that point, there was nothing left to save. The days that followed were a strange, bittersweet blur. Relief, grief, peace, exhaustion. Letting Linda go wasn't something Rachel ever imagined she'd have to do. But it became clear, if we wanted a future not built on chaos, there was no other option. This isn't just about us anymore, Rachel said one evening as we sat on the porch, watching the sky fade into gold. It's about protecting our peace, our future. She doesn't get to take that from us. That little beach house, once the epicenter of Linda's manipulations, had finally become what it was meant to be. A safe place, a retreat, our sanctuary. And more than anything, it represented what we had fought so hard to protect. Not just a house, but our life, our boundaries, our freedom. And that was worth every single battle.